All right, let's go over how to paint and weather this Sagitaur, which I call a dune buggy. I'm using quite a number of sub-assemblies, but it's going to make it easier to paint things. These roll bar cage things I built ahead of time so that I can just slide those on. Test fit it to make sure it works, but it'll go on pretty easily. All of the guns are magnetized so they can be swapped on and off as needed. I left the antenna off because, well, I'd probably break it if I had that on there. And then, of course, all of the wheels and suspension, I've kept those separate for easier painting also. Now on the suspension parts, I'm just going to do a sort of a stipple / dry brush application. I want to go for mostly covered, but if there's some of the black showing through, I'm okay with that because I want these to look kind of beat up. So 100% coverage won't be necessary. I'm using Surcoat Silver for this. I'm also going to be doing this on the roll bar, the major roll bar pieces, and on the rims. I'm not going to worry about if I get any on the black tire area because I can go back in and paint over those fairly easily. Now I'll sponge on some Mythril Blade on all the metallic parts, just to give them a little bit of a scratchy, worn appearance. I've temporarily applied the suspension parts to one side of the model. Now I'm going to use some Citadel Nuln Oil. I'm just going to go in real heavily and shade it all down. Sticking them on the model like this just lets me use it like a big handle. I'm also going to get inside the rims of the tires. I'm going to give it a really heavy application, just slop it in there. I'll also shade down all of the roll bars. Now using plate armor, I'll just lightly dry brush around the edges just to give them a little bit of definition. Also on this round thing here, just to brighten it up a bit. On my drive home from work recently, I saw a pickup truck that had the big tires and the big suspension system, and I noticed that the springs in the suspension were painted red. So I said, yeah, I'm going to have to do that. So I'm going to use this Flesh Terror's contrast paint to paint these red. Once that Flesh Terror's red is dry, I'll just put in some Nuln Oil into the gaps just to bring out that definition a little more. Now I'll base paint the tires in Vallejo's German Gray. Now I'll sponge on some cold corpse blue just to give a little bit of a texture to it. It's not a real high contrast look, but it'll be a nice basis for later steps. Now I'll dry brush those edges and knobs and bumps and lumps on the tire with Gravestone Blue. I just want to get all the detail to pop out. Now I'm going to apply a Citadel shade, Targor Rageshade. This has kind of a almost purplish look to it. Get it right up to the edge right there, but try not too much to get it over on the silver. If it does, I'm not going to worry about it. The first time I saw this color, I thought, that looks like tires. So I'm going to put this over all of what I've done fairly heavily. Now normally, when I'd be applying shades, I would say you don't want it to pool up. But in this application, I think it looks quite good. So I'm going to let it pool up wherever it wants. And I'm going to let it dry, standing straight up like that. And there it is. It's still just slightly tacky, I think. But I like the way that looks. Of course, there's going to be later weathering to go over this dust and all that. You know, I could probably just get away with painting it black because once I put all the weathering on it, you probably not going to see any of that I did, but it's fun to do. The hull of the vehicle is basically going to be white. It's not going to be pure white, but going to be a very light bone color. And I could airbrush this, but I've decided to brush paint it. I'm actually going to be stippling on some color. Now this first color is Griffon Claw. It's actually a tan color, and you can see I've thinned it way, way, way down because I want it to be a smooth application. Now, if you're saying, why did you prime it in black? Why didn't you just prime it in white? What I like about priming in black is for a military style vehicle, it allows me to determine how much texture I want, how much of the black I'm going to allow to poke through, I guess you would say. So and I could have done this in dark brown. I could have done this in dark gray. I didn't have to do it in black. Black is just quick and easy to do. Plus, I think it looks kind of cool. But it just automatically builds in shadow and does other things that I can take advantage of later. Doesn't mean I always do that. Sometimes I get to working on it and decide I want a more opaque looking color. Actually, up until about 15 minutes ago, I had planned to airbrush this. So I got to thinking about what I wanted to do, changed my mind. Here I am. So I'll put this on here and build it up, not necessarily to a complete opaque color, but just enough for later lighter colors to go over. So I'm going to paint all of this, and I'm going to leave the canopy framing black. That's the way they have it in the box art, and I like the way that looks. So I'm going to use a brush to get up near the canopy framing and get it this color, and then continue building it up. But the whole hull is this color, the underside and everything. And then later I'll be going back in and painting some more details. Now I'm going to do the same type of stippling using Ivory Tusk. And on the lower portions, I'm going to have it be much less opaque. And then as I bring it up the sides, I'm going to apply more coats to increase the opacity. Now I'm going to use Trooper White and do a dry brush around all of the edges. But also on these flat areas, I'm going to use that to just blend it all together. Lighten it down just a little more. Just keep building it up until I get it like I want. Now base coat all of the armor parts in Wyvern Green. What I'm going to do is I'm going to paint this on the outer surfaces, and then just on the inner edge, I'll leave the inside of the armor black. Of course, I'm going to be applying this in, as you would expect, 2 thin coats. All right, while that green armor dries, I'm going to start painting in all of the elements on the body of the vehicle that need to be silver. Some kind of metallic. I'm going to use this Surcoat silver, but any darker silver will do. There's quite a bit of it. And if you look on the box art, you'll see that some of the pipes and other things aren't pure silver, they're other colors. And I'm going to follow that example, but I'm going to go ahead and base everything in this color so that those later colors will go over it nicely and have a very nice metallic sheen. This color covers very well, so it's a great base for any metallics. I'm going to pick out the pipes that are articulated, segmented like this, and I'm going to use Brass Scorpion for this. If you're wondering what's the logic behind it, I think it's a cool color. Now I'll paint a few others in Canoptek Alloy. It's only slightly different than the silver, but I think it looks cool. Now I went ahead and sponged on some Mythril Blade like I did earlier on the roll bars. And now I'm going to go over everything that I just got through painting silver. I'm going to go over all of it with Nuln Oil. Now I'll apply a wash of Reikland Fleshshade to all the bronze areas and the ones with the Canoptek Alloy. I'm going to dry brush around the edges of the armor pieces with Emerald Green I'm also going to just do some overbrushing, just streaking it down from the top and just building up the color till it just looks a little scratchy and patchy and, you know, like a military vehicle that's been out fighting in war. And I'm going to use a contrast paint, Basilicanum Gray, to do kind of a wash of the white areas. What I'm going to do in this lower area down here is I'm going to be fairly generous with it. I've mixed this with 3 parts contrast medium, so it's very flowy. It's basically a wash, not just a contrast paint, more like a shade. But I'm going to be very liberal in my use down here. This is where there's going to be a lot of weathering. So I want there to be good definition, good contrast. I'm not too worried if it looks messy, because that's what I'm going to be doing a little later on. And then up here in the other areas, I'm going to do a more careful application, a recessed shade, a pen wash. And I may even mix it down with just a little bit of water to make it flow even better. But by using this Basilicanum Gray, it's not quite as stark as if I used, you know, a black color. But it's also not going to shift it too warm like if I used a brown color. Now for lots of edge highlighting. Green parts will get Emerald Green as their initial coat. And then just a little bit of Ethereal Green to help them pop. The black parts will get a first highlight in Dungeonstone Gray, and then a second spot highlight of Carcharadon, whatever that gray is on the screen name. For the white areas, I'm going to use Trooper White, and then if I need a bit more of a highlight, I'll go to Pure White, which is White Star. Well, that was a lot of edge highlighting. That took me a lot longer than I expected to get done. I didn't think it would be that way on such a tiny model. However, I went ahead and did the assembly because next I'm going to put on some decals and then I'm going to start doing the weathering. I did, like I said, I glued on the armor bits and the roll bars. I glued on the suspension, but I left the tires so they're loose. So when I get to the weathering, it will be easy to get back behind there with mud and dirt and things like that, and then just make sure the tires still fit over everything. Off camera, I'm going to put on the few decals that go on it, and if you're not familiar with that process, if I remember, check out the video that's going to appear up here in this corner somewhere, if I remember, and that'll talk all about putting on decals. I'm going to do some chipping. I'm going to use Dungeonstone Gray for the white areas. And I'm just going to be touching it in very lightly. I don't want too much. Just a little bit here or there to suggest some wear and tear. I've got the paint thinned about, 2 parts water, 1 part paint. So it's very, very thin. But that allows me to just put dots of the color where I want. Just maybe some streaks like that. Real fine stuff like that. Now on the green portions of the armor, I'll use Trooper White, because I want to work on the theory that the green is painted over the white armor. Now the reason I chose this Dungeonstone Gray, which is a darker gray color, but definitely gray. It's more closer to neutral gray than it is to black. The reason I chose this is I don't want to suggest rust. I want to suggest that maybe this is some kind of composite material underneath or something like that, or a steel type material that does not rust. So that's why I chose the gray. If you wanted something that looked a little more rusty, you'd want to choose a darker brown, dark red, something like that. Something that would suggest that rust. Also, I'm not going to be doing two-color chipping. You may have seen that where you put in a lighter color and then a darker color. I'm just going to stick to one color on each element. Just keep it simple. It still will suggest chipping to the brain, but I think sometimes if you start using multiple colors, it can start getting a little indistinct. Something else to consider when you're chipping is that chipping is a form of edge highlighting. So you can use it just like you would edge highlights to define the shapes of your model. At least it sounds good to say that when you're doing it on YouTube. Now I want to start adding some mud effects. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this Armageddon Dunes. It's one of the Citadel Technical paints. I'm going to start back here in the very deepest areas around the suspension, the underside, stuff like that. This stuff is cool because it's got some texture to it. So it's going to have a muddy appearance. I put some on, and just get a little bit of water on my brush. I just start kind of blending that in like that so that the line is not too harsh. I just blend it around. You can see here on the back. Just going to bring it along there. And then as I work, I clean off my brush, get more water, and just keep blending that. It's better to blend more away and then add more than it is to just get too much and leave it. One thing you have to be careful of is when you're putting it here onto the actual suspension parts, you don't want to get it up here where the tires are going to go, because you'll have to scrape that off so you can get them on there. Now I've got that on there, and just going to let that dry for a while. Build it up in layers. One of the things that I always try to think about when I'm weathering, doing this kind of weathering, is realistically a vehicle riding through the mud. I've seen this with my own vehicles that I used to be in the Army. Realistically, it's going to get covered in mud quite often, all the way up the side, completely opaque coverage. You go through a big puddle, thick, sticky mud, it's going to stick. If you stop and it's still on there, it's going to dry and it's going to be there for a while. You can wash it off, but it's going to be there. So I'm not going for absolute realism, but rather I want to do enough mud so that no one doubts that it's muddy, but at the same time, I don't want to obscure all of the detail and all of the other painting and all of the other points of interest. So there's a balance, I think, that you have to strike when you're adding weathering to your models. Now I've got the tires in place, and I'm going to use another technical paint from Citadel called Armageddon Dust. This is basically the same color. It just has less texture. Now what I've done is I've stuck these wheels on. They're not glued on, they're just stuck on. But I've taken some of this, put it in my palette, and watered it down about 50-50 with water. All I'm going to do is put it on the tire, get it all over. Off camera, I'll get to the backside and all that. I'm just doing this so I can demonstrate it. I put it on there, and then I clean my brush off fairly well in water, leave it fairly heavily loaded with water. And then I just go back and I start blending that in and just reducing that a bit. The reason why is, while the mud is going to get thrown up on the vehicle and it's going to stick to the vehicle, the wheels are constantly spinning, so they're going to be slinging stuff off. Now, remember, they're going to be slinging it off in this direction, so if you go back and add some more mud and dust effects up under here as you're doing it, that fits. That's where it's going to get slung off. Build it up slowly in layers, and that way you can remain in complete control of what's going on, and the technique will not rule you, but you will rule the technique. I'm going to use a Citadel paint called Tallarn Sand, just like this. The reason I'm going to use that is it's basically the same color as the other two technical paints that I just used to give it that texture. Now I've thinned this down heavily with water, and what I'm going to do is just do some test splatters over here on the paper towel just to check how much I can get away with. I'm just going to start splattering this onto the side of the vehicle. Now I'm only going to splatter it roughly up to this line. I'm under the theory that, it's not going to splatter necessarily up to the top, but just a little bit up the sides. And you can go as heavy or as light as you want with this. When you're doing this, just think about when the wheels spin, where would they throw mud? That's where you want to do your splatters. Now, adding all that mud has lost a little bit of the definition on the tires and the suspension and a few other areas. I'm just going to take some Agrax Earthshade, just kind of line some of that back in, just to bring back some of the definition. It'll still look dirty, just make it stand out a little more. This is certainly a step you can skip. This is more for a tabletop look than it is a hyper-realistic look. Now while that's drying, I'm going to add some fluid staining. Now all this is more of the Agrax Earthshade. I just thinned it down with water. I'm just going to go into various places and just put some staining. It could be oil stains, some kind of hydraulic stain, super duper futuristic space fluid stains, stains of coffee or whatever. Bonus points if you use multiple colors. Again, I'm just keeping it simple, so I'm only going with this one color. Alright, I'm going to take the model into my airbrush room, which my wife for some reason calls the laundry room. I don't get that, but anyway, I'm going to take that in there and I'm going to hit this with a coat of matte varnish because I really want to matte everything down, and I'm going to do that before I take off the canopy masks because otherwise it would really dull down the canopy. So let me get that matte varnish on, and then there will be a couple more steps and this guy should be done. Alright, with the matte varnish applied, I'm going to go in. I'm just going to start peeling off this liquid mask. Now with the canopy mask removed, I'm going to use an extremely thinned down Tallarn Sand, which I used earlier for the splattering. I'm just going to glaze that over the canopy. Alright, well I think I'm going to call this one done. I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. It's a fun little model to build. Man, I just really liked building and painting and weathering this thing. It's just got so much to commend itself for. Whether you're playing the game or whether you're just looking for a cool model to build, this one definitely fit the bill. And I've got the weapons, as I talked about earlier, magnetized, so I can switch those out anytime I want. I didn't film this, but on the missiles here, I painted these just like the box art. I just did some various reds on that one and then painted these white with some red tips and just went with the box art look. But I think I really like this gun best. I think it just looks kind of cool with that kind of brassy looking center there to it. That looks kind of cool. I like the way it catches the light. But this is why I I have switched to just sticking to Warhammer, is because the variety of kits that are available and just the number of things that you can do, whether it has wheels or tracks or wings or it's figures or walkers or anything like that. It's just some great stuff, and I have a lot of fun with it. Well, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it's been beneficial to you, and I hope you saw the other one where I did the interior of the vehicle. If you did not, there should be a link. If I remember to put it up there, it's going to be right up there, and take a look at that. But thank you for watching, and of course, thank you to the patrons who support the work that I do. I'm very grateful for you, for your support of me and my family, and keeping me going in the hobby. So thank you all very much for this. And finally, as I always like to do, I'll leave you with one final thought. In this hobby, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.